Perhaps I can bring in Giulietta Talevi is, as I mentioned, Standard Bank's head of real estate finance for Africa. Giulietta, if I can ask you, did you come into this loan with some trepidation? Because we saw what happened in Zambia during COVID. They defaulted on their sovereign debt, which was a really sort of disastrous, I think, thing for the country, and it must have made you guys in Grit quite nervous to see that happening. And I imagine there is a lot of nervousness amongst banks in general when you see these countries where there were some pretty groundbreaking Eurobond loans that were set up in the last few years, and then you have someone default. I mean, that's kind of the nightmare for a bank. So from your perspective, did that sour you at all, or is that one of the reasons why it took so long, 11 months, to get this loan across the line?
The challenge with the continent and the countries within the continent is the volatility that you tend to see from time to time. Bronwyn sort of alluded to it. You have to think of the continent or investments within the continent like a portfolio. And that's typically what we build our thesis on. Even throughout the transaction, there were sort of changes that evolved throughout. So take Ghana, for example. At the beginning of the transaction, there was some pressure, but not as aggressive as sort of transpired towards the end of the transaction. But I think you've got to the way we because of the characteristics of property, you have to think about your investment, your structure on a through the cycle basis. So those macro shocks will certainly impact what we do, how we structure, but you then have to layer that against the property fundamentals, against the strength of the property, the underlying property, and the potential recovery of the markets or of the countries.
Hi, I'm Leon. I'm the CFO of Grit since 2015.
Hi, I'm Jacob van Zyl, Head of Treasury for Grit, and I was the project lead for the syndication transaction we just closed with Standard Bank of $306 million.
My name is Ndombenja Odolo. I work for Standard Bank in the investment banking division. On this particular transaction, I was the lead advisor for Standard Bank for purposes of closing the Grit transaction or Grit syndication.
The main objective of this transaction was really just to make sure that we sufficiently addressed a number of issues, cost of funding being one, other being the actual term of debt, the refinance risk that is inevitably going to exist in an environment where the global debt markets are under pressure, rising interest rates. We started this process long before the interest rate cycle, even pre the war in Ukraine. So this is just one of those items that was on our to-do list to improve the fund and the metrics of the fund, and then going into the entire process, things changed along the way, but it still goes down to the fundamentals of what we're trying to achieve, and they have been achieved.
So the process started about 11 months ago, where we've actually brought Standard Bank to Mauritius. We had a workshop amongst ourselves and Standard Bank where we came up with a number of ideas how we sort of conventionally sort of financed and refinanced properties in Africa. Typically that was on a deal-by-deal basis, but actually it started long before that, because back in 2019 we did a slightly sort of, call it a phase one or step one to this type of transaction in Mozambique, where we actually pulled 9 assets together on a cross-collateralized basis. Having said that, there was only one country in Mozambique. Now we've just basically expanded this across 5 different countries. It contains 16 different assets, and it basically wrapped up 7 different debt facilities.
I was definitely part of the journey from the beginning, and the journey began in 2019 when we did the first cross-collateralized structure in Mozambique. We did the syndication now in 2022, so from structuring right until where we got legals across the line, up until the point where we will finally achieve pay-away on the transaction.
A lot of people didn't think this could be done. To be perfectly frank, we weren't sure it could be done. We did have a lot of self-belief in ourselves that we could get anything across the line if we had the right backing from our partners, our legal teams, not only ours but also that of the banks. And the fundamentals of the transaction is really what underpins the fact that this was going to be a success. It was definitively going to be hard, but that's not something we're shy of. You don't call yourself grit if you are not prepared to actually show that. Walking the streets of Africa and getting that grit on your shoes is what we're about. It's something that we live by and strive by, and it's just part of our DNA that adversity is you eat it for breakfast. At the end of the day, grit is a lifestyle. It's something that we do because we love the content, we love what we do, and we love what we can achieve and the impact we can make on people's lives.